Hi there, it's Mark Jeftovic here from SpokenTome Media, and I am presenting my second ever podcast with Gary Lachman, the author of numerous books, including the two that we're going to discuss today. One is The Secret History of Consciousness, and the other is Caretakers of the Cosmos, Living Responsibly in an Unfinished World. Though the two books were written 10 years apart, they do complete part of a consistent arc, I think, between his work over a span of time, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Both books are now available on audio. Check the SpokenTome Media website at spokentome.media, and you can look for it on your favorite platforms, Amazon, iTunes, etc. Thanks, and here's the show.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. So I'll just do a quick intro. I'll probably punch in another one, but it's Mark Jeftovic here with Gary Lachman, who is a prolific author, and in another incarnation I always have to say you were a founder of Blondie, and that you're
one of
the co-founders of Blondie, and that you're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because I aspired to be a rock star in a previous incarnation myself.
Oh.
So, anyway.
Well, I got to do what every kid wanted to do when I was a kid, so I was very, very lucky.
And I raised my kid listening to some of your songs, so she likes Blondie actually. So it's kind of.
There you go. Good taste.
Yes, exactly. So we're here to talk. We'll talk in general terms, but SpokenTome Media recently, I would say recently in the last 6 months, finished the audiobook version of a couple books that you wrote a long time ago. So the one was The Secret History of Consciousness from 2003. And then the second one was Caretakers of the Cosmos from 2013. And, as I was taking my notes and doing the rundown, and I realized that both of those books kind of blend in my mind because they were so interrelated to each other in terms of the subject matter. And I noticed also in the foreword or the first intro to Caretakers, you were talking about how that was a follow-on of a third book, The Quest for Hermes Trismegistus, which I have, but I have not finished reading it. But if I look at that grand arc that those books sort of trace out, I would in my mind say Secret History of Consciousness was that consciousness is not a side effect of the brain, and how it's evolved over our history and how it's depicted as evolving over our history, while Caretakers of the Cosmos is we are part of an unfolding to repair the universe, and we'll get into that. And then the Quest for Hermes Trismegistus was in a sense religion of the mind. Is that anywhere in the ballpark?
Sure. Those are all things that are those books deal with. So yes.
Right. And when I was reading these, and I think I've mentioned this in our emails before, and I won't bring too much into it, but I've been doing my own work on looking at techno-utopianism and hyper-materialism. And I was reading a couple of books at the same time, and I thought, these books are like thesis, antithesis of these other books. So, Secret History of Consciousness is the antithesis of Daniel Dennett's Consciousness Explained. I think it's and then Caretakers of the Cosmos is the antithesis of Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near.
I didn't have. Well, I certainly talk about Dennett in the beginning of Secret History of Consciousness. I just use him as an example of this trend in the late 90s up into 2000s about explaining consciousness. So he's there, and Nicholas Humphrey, and Francis Crick, and John Searle. It's funny. Funnily enough, Twitter today had an exchange over this, precisely the same arguments that I sort of talk about in the beginning of Secret History of Consciousness. What we're saying here, the opposition, people like Dennett and these others who either want to explain it away, or it's in terms of some physical, material or physicalist or whatever, however sophisticated. Gerald Edelman is another one, and I mean he's more sophisticated than those guys in one sense. And so, but just the general proposition that, well, how about we just treat it as something that is in and of itself rather than a product of, or John Searle said that consciousness, the brain secretes consciousness like the liver secretes bile, and it's sort of like, I mean, you think about that and you think like, well, we really don't go around comparing each other's bile that much and saying, God, he's really got great bile. Whereas we somehow do say like, he's got a great mind, or he's very conscious. I mean, you might say someone's very bilious, but that's not, that's a negative term. So and even today, just so much, I put up a little few lines from a book I've just been finishing, and about free will, whereas I basically say, I think effort, the phenomena or the experience of making an effort, to me suggests that that's an example or a kind of proof of free will, because we have to decide to make the effort, and we have to decide that something's worth making the effort for. And so it really is a felt, decision that you make, because you can say, oh, screw it, I'm not going to bother, or you have the sour grapes, where you rationalize. But if something is important enough to you, you will make an effort. You will expend more energy on it than you might think is worth the possible, return. But in any case, this is a little long-winded way of just talking about what effort makes. No machine can decide to try harder. No machine can say, okay, I'm going to pull myself together, and damn it, I'm going to do it this time. And we all know that we have experiences where that happens. And so we somehow draw on energy that we didn't know we had, or something along those lines. But it's a felt decision. And I know all the determinists out there can say like, well, yes, that's an illusion you have. And I say, well, if that's the case, does that apply to you as well? Because if it applies to you too, then what you're saying to me is, but why should I take it any seriously? It's no more a real argument than my own arguments are, because I'm compelled to say what I'm compelled to say, and so are you. It's like Francis Crick, when he tells us that our hopes and dreams and ambitions and fears and sense of identity and free will is nothing more than the result of molecules and nerve cells doing what they do. I ask him, well, are your hopes and fears and ideas and dreams also included in that? Because if they are, then molecules are molecules, aren't they? Like, why are your molecules producing the right answer and everyone else's aren't? It seems, maybe I'm missing a step in all this, but it seems to me logic just says, unless you want to say, but mine, I am an exception to this rule. And so I just take it, well, I don't know. I can't fight these guys on their science. I'm not a neuroscientist or anywhere near it, but I can think like, well, it just doesn't make sense. Logic just tells me you're sawing off, the limb and all that kind of thing. And so strangely enough, just that you're saying that came up in a conversation and wound up talking about exactly what I'm talking about now.
Right. And I mean, this topic was forefront in my mind the whole time that I was rereading these books while we were making the audiobook version, because especially now that there really seems to be this heightened embrace of even transhumanism. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal looking forward to the end of humanity. And it was, COVID-19 has spotlighted the promise and peril of transhumanism, the idea of using technology to overcome sickness, aging, and death. Now, I mean, this is a very different meaning of the word transhumanism that you cited actually in Caretakers. Julian Huxley talked about transhumanism, but not in this sense at all.
No, that's true. I mean, Julian, in 1965, I think he coined it. And I think a book called New Bottles for New Wine, or I might get the title not exactly correct. But yes, and it's transhuman, but he means in, I want to say spiritual, but that word has so much baggage, I really don't like it. We don't really have a good alternative word to that, but it's more than cultural, it's art and all that, but it's that whole metaphysical character of being human, where we've created this other realm, another dimension beyond the physical, art and thought and imagination and science and all that. And it's through that dimension that we've, created a transhuman sort of level. I mean, the only problem, transhuman is a great idea. The only problem is we're not even human yet. That's how I feel. So, I mean, but it's funnily enough that you say this, because that's an idea I have for another book. It's transhuman, all too transhuman. Borrowing from Nietzsche. That's an idea I have. But that's percolating in the background. But no, I think there is all this, and this is exactly what so many seers and sages, people like Rudolf Steiner and others in different ways have said this is what's coming. This kind of this blend with the machines and all that sort of thing. And the point I was trying to make in this little thing I put up on Twitter was just like, well, I said, no machine can make an effort. No machine can decide to try harder. This is some strange phenomena that we, and some other dogs, sometimes you see dogs perform these kind of miracles of rescue and all this kind of thing, So it seems a gradient, but there's a certain degree where you can kind of push beyond, And one of my favorite quotes from Secret History of Consciousness is from Bergson, where he said, "The mind has the faculty of drawing on more than it contains."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which I just find, I just think, yeah. You can't say that, you can't prove that in any kind of logical, way, but it's an experience that one can have. And people like William James, when he talks about the phenomena of second wind, pushing past these limits that you've come by habit to obey, and then you suddenly discover you've got, all these reserves of power and energy that you didn't know you had, and all that. And so, all that sort of stuff, I don't think you can account for in terms of these models that people like Dennett and these others make. And those sorts of experiences are all kind of marginalized as, fringe and not really important and la-da-da-da. But they're the kinds of things that people like Bergson and William James and other, very famous, prestigious people 100 years ago, who were examining ideas of consciousness, but not from precisely the opposite side, as you were saying. They're not taking it from Dennett's, or what they would say is actually, yes, the mechanical side of human consciousness, it's there without doubt, but that's precisely what the whole idea about life and freedom and all of that is to work against. We can allow ourselves to be completely mechanical and predictable, but we do have a reservoir of kind of free will somewhere, but we only tap into it when we're forced to make an effort of some kind.
Well, that's the core of Gurdjieff's work, right? Was that we're mostly mechanical, but we have this little margin of leeway on the edges that if we could continually strive to expand that leeway, we can become more fully human, right?
No, I think this is true. Yeah, and I mean, Gurdjieff has a particular kind of very austere kind of severe approach to it, and he's also a psychologist of great depth. But others have approached it as well, and using similar different kind of language. That is fundamentally it. We have this tendency to kind of congeal into habitual modes, and because they're evolutionarily adaptive. We've made a little niche for ourselves in the life world, and why branch out beyond it? Well, we do have some kind of exploratory urge within us, which I don't think can, yes, it can be not explained, but it can be seen as an evolutionary urge, but not an evolutionary urge, not an evolutionary adaptive trait. There's Maslow said we have a need to know just as much as we have a need to eat and to sleep, and at some point to have sex. We also have a need to know, and not only for practical utilitarian purposes. Knowledge in itself is a good, and that's the other thing too. I mean, you somehow can't imagine a machine that would recognize a good in itself, not the utilitarian or practical, or a sort of non-purposive good. And that's something that from Plato on down, the good, the true, and the beautiful, we used to think were very important kinds of things, but we come to only recognize practical utilitarian goods that have a practical end.
Well, I've been keeping a short list and I came up as a computer programmer and a systems, like a network engineer. So I look at this and I think of, well, what are the things that I can't even conceive of programs being able to codify that are aspects of intelligence or self-consciousness or consciousness. And you mentioned making an effort, or recognizing a good unto itself. And one of the ones that's on my list was doing something against your better judgment. Like, try to convince a computer program to do that, and it's by definition can't be done, but it's something that humans do all day long, every day. And
well, isn't this the plot of so many science fiction stories where the computer is much more intelligent and logical, and you are in error. You are a faulty machine. We must eradicate you precisely because you do things. Well, this goes back to, it just came out recently, my most recent book, The Return of Holy Russia. And it deals with issues like this, not so much necessarily in the context of AI and that sort of thing, but, free will and determinism and all that. And one of the main characters who talks about that is Dostoevsky. And, he made this in his book, Notes from Underground. The character in there says that, yes, even if you may be able to prove to me that everything works in this fantastic, mechanical fashion where all the gears turn around and this one vast clock and everybody fits into it in some way. But in the end, even if that's true, I will go insane on purpose just to prove that I'm free.
Right.
And it's sort of like, this is the same kind of thing, going against your best judgment just to prove this irrational, because freedom is irrational. I mean, fundamentally, it's irrational. And in fact, any kind of logical proof of freedom should be dismissed. In the sense that it's kind of, that may be too grand, but still, in the sense that, it has this, again, did this book on Russia, and one of the people I write about quite a bit is the Russian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev, who I write about in Caretakers, the Cosmos as well, and his wonderful book, The Meaning of the Creative Act, which came out about 100 years ago, but it's still, a very powerful book about the creative urge in a kind of religious existential sense. But it is this notion about freedom being ultimately what he calls maionic freedom, which is it's undifferentiated. It's even before, it's before good and evil. We always talk about beyond good and evil, but there's before good and evil as well. And this is this pleroma kind of, the same sort of thing in Tibetan Buddhism with the sunyata, or, the neti in Hinduism. It's this realm of undifferentiated potential. And, this kind of freedom, this Urgrund, this the ground, like the fundamental ground of reality, has this kind of absolute free potential, and then it differentiates into us and the world and all that, and our actions. We're kind of like the cutting edge of that, because we're constantly making these decisions about what to do. And I think everyone knows, I think we all, this is the thing, the people who deny that we have free will, they try to argue away the actual phenomenological experience we have of the difference between when you're exerting something, and you also know when you're just following the line of least resistance, or you're just doing what you usually do. So when you light your 10th cigarette of the day, or whatever, have your 10th chai latte of the day, it's, you're basically going through a pattern of something. The very first one you can appreciate, but then, you carry on, it's just kind of a pattern. But then when you absolutely do something where you feel like, yes, for once in my life, I've decided to do something, and then that is, that just feels phenomenologically different, and the action may be the same. The behavior you exhibit may not be anything that suggests that in any way, but your interior experience is that. And you can't, you can only say that's the case. And I would say that it's not the onus isn't on me or anyone else to prove that this is true. I think the onus is on the others to somehow come up with a convincing argument that, no, that is not the case, that your felt experience of being free is really an illusion. And I just only turn around and say, well, that must apply to you as well. And if that's the case, then, it seems like one illusion trying to convince another illusion that it's an illusion. And that just, if it's all illusion, I'd rather go through some illusions that I feel immediately are much better ones. Like, I have free will, of course, what have I got to lose? It's like Pascal's wager, the old thing, brother, if you
Yeah.
what is it? If God exists and you don't believe in him, you're screwed. If God doesn't exist and you don't believe in him, so what? But if God does exist and you do believe in him, that's the only safe bet.
It's the lowest risk, high return bet out of the 4 quadrants.
There you go. So what have you got to lose?
Yeah.
So that's how I figure it. And all the great teachers, life is a risk. You have to take risks. You have to bet on it. That's the whole notion of freedom. If it wasn't that, if there was a safety net, then it wouldn't be what it is. It wouldn't be the cutting edge. We're on the beachheads of the abyss.
It's actually, I hope I can hold my thought through 2 points, because one I have here in my notes, the other one just came to light as you were talking about this. But towards the end of the last time we spoke, we hit really briefly on the simulation hypothesis, that we're just living in a simulation. And you said, well, this is nothing new. I mean, this is Plato's cave, basically 2,000 years later. But the funny thing, the way you punctuated it was, you said, even if true, who are you going to tell that to? Which is right. Which is the same thing that you're saying now. Yeah. If our minds are just the result of the ping pong ball universe and just the neurons colliding off each other in our heads, then who are you going to tell that to? Because me hearing it is just the same result of yours doing it. Yeah. And that's one of the contradictions I find in this sort of material reductionist world, especially with this fascination with artificial intelligence. You hear AI all over the place. I mean, as a computer professional, I can say, and no one argues with me on this, AI doesn't exist. All right. What we call AI are really what we used to call in the mid-90s expert systems. Okay. So whenever you hear AI and people are trying to make you believe that computers are thinking to give you a better investment recommendation or calculate your credit score, there's no AI. The computer's not thinking, it's just an algorithm. That's it. Anyhow, so we believe that consciousness doesn't really exist. That's the sort of position. And yet it either doesn't exist or we don't know what it is, but somehow we're going to engineer our way to this destination that we don't even know where it is. And when we get there, it's going to be fully self-conscious, self-aware, super AI. And then we're going to upload our minds, which don't exist either, into it and live forever. And I just find that that's a complete contradiction. And the other point, which I was worried I was going to lose, you said, that having to accept life as a challenge and requiring effort, that takes the sort of safe bet off the table. And it's sort of a flippening from this conventional wisdom of like Steven Pinker recently tweeted, fundamental Christians are making the coronavirus epidemic worse because they believe in an afterlife. So they're not as concerned about, they don't care if they die of coronavirus because they think they're going to go to heaven after. And I thought this is completely backwards, that the safe bet is to believe you have no free will. Your mind is just, your line was, steam that your brain gives off. That's the safe bet, because then nothing really matters, but it's pure nihilism.
No, it lets you off the hook.
Yeah.
This is the thing. I mean, and I don't know, just in my mind as you were saying this, and this was sort of the reaction I always thought that someone like Foucault, say, had to Sartre. Because Sartre is, everything depends on you. You're constantly, committed. Your actions are yours. You're free. You have this kind of freedom. It's all choice all the time. And it was this great drama, and this great weight on all your actions. And then Foucault comes and overthrows that with this whole notion like, oh no, we're not free. We're all part of these epistemes, which are this kind of whole structural idea about kind of archaeological periods and knowledge and that kind of thing. And in a way, it's kind of fundamentally Marxist, maybe without the economic, kind of slant to it. But it's the idea that what you consider to be your individual choice and freedom is really absolutely constrained and contained and funneled by these large social forces, whether it's language with Derrida or power structures with Foucault and all these other guys. And suddenly, oh, I'm off the hook. Yeah, I mean, nothing. It's not me. I'm just an atom. I'm just a carrier of genes. It's not my gene. My genes made me do it, or whatever. Social forces, or what is it? I forget language made me do it, or something. And it's sort of like, well, yeah, but okay, fine. But then it all becomes kind of just playing around with words and games and all that. And then, but again, who are you saying this to? If I can't say, yes, you're right, I've considered your arguments and I've considered them against other arguments, and I've come to the conclusion that they're true, except I wonder, do you apply them to yourself? Because if you do, it seems to me you undermine yourself. That's why I always think this about Marx too. It's like the whole idea that, philosophy is a product of, it's a superstructure on top of the basic structure of economic, the war of the classes, blah, 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 except mine. Because I'm the one who pointed that out. And so all the other guys, they're invalidated because they don't know this. It's like, okay, fine. Whoa, yeah, I'm sure. And then he convinces everybody. But then I just think, well, hold on a second. Does that apply to you? And it just seems to me you have to agree fundamentally that there must be some open space where minds can discuss and try to understand and disagree and all that, for your argument to have any kind of power behind it. And it just, I don't know, maybe I'm just caught on that kind of thing, but it just seems to me a kind of thing that undermines all these sorts of things. And I suddenly think like, well, okay, if I understand your argument, I think you refute yourself, and you're not a lot of fun to read either, because it's very difficult stuff to go through this. So I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to bother doing this anymore. I will make the decision. I'll take the challenge. And if it turns out that all of my reasoning about this is wrong, and because I didn't read past page 293, then I'll accept that. But at this point, I've decided that life is short, this book is long, and I don't agree with you anyway. And so I will go, turn my attention to others. But yeah, I think I may have got off the point from what you were saying, but it sort of triggered that,
No, not at all. I mean, yeah. We've kind of like diverged from my notes, so we're kind of winging it from here, but I still have them.
Okay. But you had those two ideas, and I thought that, they were very good. Yeah.
But it reminds me a lot, if I understand it correctly, but just this whole idea of that you let yourself off the hook, but there are always these strange ironies or contradictions to it, like intersectionality today, where so nobody is, and at the risk, I don't want to say anything political or anything that's going to get either of us canceled, but
just apologize before and after.
Okay, yes. Okay. We'll tell each other to do better and we'll move on. But that nobody's responsible for anything, because there's all of these intersectional forces that define your character, except whoever is the subject of the cancel culture of the day is responsible for things that they weren't even in the remote vicinity of, even on a scale of time. And so
no, I know it's I mean, you can go that way. I mean, I think a great deal of what Nietzsche called ressentiment has been churned up in recent times, and it's come out in a variety of ways. And it's just we have to watch out we don't turn into Rubishovs, if you know Darkness at Noon. And,
no.
Arthur Kessler's novel Darkness at Noon, 1940, and it was a novel about the show trials.
Oh,
Stalin show trials, and there's old comrade, old revolutionary Rubashov, who's been arrested for something he didn't do. And the novel is basically about him in his prison cell. I mean, I'm giving it all away and all that.
That's fine.
And ultimately being convinced to plead guilty to crimes he didn't commit and to be executed for, crimes against the state he didn't commit for the good of the revolution and all that. And this is Kessler himself threw himself into communism in the early 1930s. And then, after a few years, he realized that, it wasn't what he believed it was, and he got into the bad books of people like Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir on the left bank, and Merleau-Ponty and all that, because they were fervent, they weren't card carrying, but because they hated the bourgeoisie so much that you had to be And no, but I mean, Rubashov is this character who convinces himself. He's sort of like Winston Smith at the end of 1984.
Right.
You know, where he yes, I accept it. So, but he accepts it. You know, it's a long. I mean, it's a very grim novel, but it's a long, wonderful, you know, dialogue between the two of them and the arguments coming up and all that. And this is exactly what was happening in the show trials, and it's something similar now. I mean, someone I know recently posted something on Facebook about Keir Starmer here, who's the new Labour leader, and I'm not political at all. I just know these people because their names come up on the news. But because of some comment he made about the Black Lives Matter protests, somebody criticized him about it, and then he said that he would take unconscious bias training or whatever the hell it is.
Right.
And it was sort of like, you know, dust off those Skinner boxes. That's what it, you know, it made me feel like. It's sort of, one doesn't want, of course, there are biases and prejudices that run through the culture that we're all brought up in, and like, you know, strains in a marble wall or something, all that stuff runs through it. But what it strikes me is sort of like, it's like, you know, the old Freudian thing, like, oh no, I'm sorry, yes, I've listened to your argument, but I just don't buy it. But Freud's, well, there you go. It's the defense mechanisms kicking in. I mean, what more must I say? Or the old communist thing where you just, yes, I listen to the arguments, but they just don't convince me. Well, my friend, comrade, you have false consciousness. And no wonder, because you're a product of this culture. No wonder you feel like that. No wonder I'm saying like, well, I'm a little hesitant about taking this kind of behavioral training or unconscious bias, because although I've been practicing phenomenology for quite some time, and that's precisely about uncovering your unconscious bias. You know, it's precisely about uncovering what you add to your experience of the world that you naively originally believe is just there, objectively. You know, so that's fundamentally what phenomenology is, where, you know, it's about the intentionality of consciousness. So you can uncover the intentions you already have, unconsciously informed your picture of the world with, and once you do that, then you can actually, the Colin Wilson side of you know, that's like the first step. That's the Sartrean existential kind of side of phenomenology, bad faith and all that kind of thing. The next side is you can increase your level of intention. You know, once you realize that what you're doing, or you can at least change the things that you were intending, because we're intending all the time, whether we want to or not. You know, we wouldn't be conscious of anything unless there was some effort. It's an unconscious effort of you know, like Wilson says, we have perceptions and the will to perceive. And we're aware of our perceptions, but we're not aware of our will to perceive. And phenomenology is this philosophical method of analysis of uncovering layers of that will. And many things, you know, you actually see, oh my God, I thought that was part of the world, but actually I've been seeing things through this lens. And then that leads to the next step. Oh, actually, I'm in some way in charge of what I see out there. It isn't just fed to me passively. You know, it's not a Twitter feed. It's not a Twitter feed. Or if it is, I have to reach out and pick out the bits that are, you know, that I want to, you know, see. So all those, I by all means, we should all do that. But I'm a little wary of any particular group, you know, somehow making this into a very literal kind of process, you know, that you have to go to the machine, you know, to go, whatever it is, to go, you know, to be cleared out or something, you know, whether it's that or Scientology or anything like that. You know, we all can learn how to do this ourselves, and that is the human project. That is the way we become fully human. You know, we're on our way. I mean, I think that's a good title for a book, on the way to being human. But that's another down the line.
Let's, you know, this, I wanted to talk for sure today about the whole concept of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Tikkun, right?
I don't know, Tikkun.
From Caretakers of the Cosmos. It sort of comes into what we are sort of talking about, but I guess in a maybe a more personal to the greater world sense, that not only do we have this responsibility to take responsible for, you know, to be responsible for our own lives and not let ourselves off the hook and to expend effort. And what you were just talking about was something that I always say is that, don't worry, spend less time trying to rehabilitate the world and rehabilitate yourself. Like everyone, nobody's perfect, but if everyone
Absolutely.
tries to like conquer their own addictions, and again, biases are another thing, like even, investors spend a lot of time on this, trying to figure out their own cognitive biases and mental maps, and where are they, because those are really going to cost me and my clients money if I am not aware of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but if everyone worked on themselves, then the world will become a better place. And then, as distinct from wokeness, I'm great, you people are all reprobates, and I have to inform you as to your heresy so that you can do better. But even Tikkun isn't that at all. It's more of that unfolding, that we're part of that entire unfolding of the universe itself, and that we have this responsibility as the vanguard, possibly vanguard. Who knows? Maybe we're bacteria.
Bacteria could be a vanguard. I mean, this is a particular beachhead. This is the one we find ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
A great many others out there in the great cosmos, I suspect. But I haven't made any contact with them. Maybe they're waiting for me to, exhibit behavior which suggests contact would be profitable. I don't know. Well, I'm fine. I'm doing the best I can. But no, I think you're right. The tikkun is this word in the Kabbalistic tradition, and it means repair. And the idea was that when God or whoever, the maker, whoever might have been, was creating the universe, it poured forth all these energies, and there were these vessels, these kind of bowls or cups, or that were supposed to hold the energies that are being poured down into it. And either they weren't deep enough and everything overflowed, or they were faulty and they cracked. And this whole notion of the vessels when the vessels cracked in the Kabbalistic tradition. And what happened was that instead of this pure, outpouring of divine energies creating everything, it got mixed up with lots of other stuff, with lower material. So all of that kind of energy got mixed up with, as I said, denser sorts of things, and it was a kind of mess. And in Caretakers, I say in the beginning was the spill, and this was according to Itzhak Luria, who's the great, I think, on the 14th century Kabbalist in Safed. And this was the idea that, and there was this whole, there's wonderful ideas about, the creation of things and all that. And of course, they're all myths, they're not logical proofs, but they have a certain power. They impress us with, yes, it's something like that. And I'm not going to go off on this tangent, but I think in our own experience, we can see similarly in how we actually experience things, something along the same lines as what he's arguing for as a kind of cosmological event. But yes, and then but what happened is, in everything out in the world, there are these divine sparks that are. It's like the Gnostic notion. They're deeply hidden within us in some ways. But tikkun is this repair. We humans somehow, God had to create humans in order to clean up the mess. Put it that way. We're kind of God's repairman. Here in the UK, there's a kids figure called, Bob the Builder. And it's can you fix it? Yes, I can. And so we're God's Bob the Builder. And the whole idea is like, I made this mess, and so make these people. What you have to do is you have to sweep up all the bits of spirit that have been lodged in the shards of the lower forms of matter, lower matter, and all that. And we can do that. And there's a general way, random acts of kindness and all that. But then there's also a kind of very specific way in which each of us ourselves, we're somehow destined to awaken the spirit in some particular thing. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be a person, but a thing, and things of that sort, and release it and somehow. And so that, in that sense, we're repairing, the universe. And Caretaker, euphonically, it sounded better than the repairman of the universe, which sounds like it would have been, What's his name? God, I can't remember now. That whole science fiction epic. That's just a big joke.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hitchhiker's Guide. Yeah, it sounds like something like that. But Caretakers is a little passive because we're not only just taking care in a curatorial kind of way. We actually are kind of making it better. So our job is actually put Humpty Dumpty back together again, but in a way that was even better than the first place. And that's the whole thing. So we don't just put it back together. We somehow improve on it. And fundamentally, it's about what we were talking about before. I would say it's about recognizing the active, creative, free character of ourselves and our consciousness. It may only happen a few times in our life, but when we do that, we can somehow feel that we're an active agent in this ongoing pulse of creation, which again sounds very flowery. I mean, Berdyaev talks about the 8th day of creation, which we are in now. We're in the participant. I mean, the Big Bang. I mean, put it this way. If the Big Bang is still going on, right? I mean, we're still kind of, so if you think it the other way around, the creation is still going on, and people like Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher, and Alfred North Whitehead, Anglo-American philosopher. I mean, and there's others today that are more, contemporary, who I should know more about, and I haven't been able to keep up lately. But these guys from back in the 20th century, they're saying, well, the universe is a living thing and it's growing and it's open-ended, and it's stretching out. It's pushing the frontiers, it's pushing the beachheads further on, and perhaps that's going on physically in some way. We can only observe a certain amount. I'm going to say amount of the universe. We can only observe a certain, amount of the universe, because past that, the light from the objects receding from us never gets to us because they're going away so fast. So we can't say actually how big the universe is, because we can only say how big the observable universe is. And I think similarly with inside in the inner universe, at some point in our inner retreat and awareness of ourselves, going deeper and deeper, we do reach a certain point where we can't. It's still the other part of it, the unconscious, whatever we want to call it. It's still me peering into this sort of unknown part of myself from which things emerge, and likewise, I would say out there. So somewhere, maybe those two things meet in some way. This is something Jung talked about when he said reality is psychoid, somehow both material and psychic, and at some inconceivable depth of being, it's like that, but we never experience that, because we're here, we experience the duality of it. And again, this is sort of like what Daria was talking about, this Urgrund, this primal ground of freedom, which is just, we can only say what it isn't. We can only speak of it in this negative kind of way.
The idea, as you're describing it, of Tikkun, in my mind, seems a lot like it has this humility to it, whereas Kurzweil, in The Singularity is Near, expresses almost, I would say, a cosmetically identical idea that we're going to infuse the universe with our intelligence, but it seems to have a hubris to it, not humility. So it's sort of like, well, the universe is here by accident, and it's just a fluke, and we evolved out of it, and our minds are here, and there's nothing else in the universe except us, and we're going to infuse the universe with our brilliance after this post. And that just, they kind of go in the same direction, but I see one seems to miss the point. And then there's also this countercurrent today of neither humility or hubris, but that humanity, it's derisive. We're a cancer. we're part of the problem.
Oh yeah, well there you go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you mentioned, you mentioned in, and I had my note here, the first citizens, and that the universe was more of that.
First citizens of the cosmos.
Yes.
Yeah. It's Max Scheler.
Right.
Great German phenomenologist, early 20th century. Yeah, no, he should be read more. And in fact, today I would say he's very appropriate because this is off tangent what we're talking about now, but apropos, you sort of mentioned it earlier, resentiment. He wrote a long essay about resentiment and all that, and it's yeah. So he would be apt for that. But no, he had this. No, Scheller had this whole idea that we're not. Well, it's like the old Sufi. We're in the world but not of it. So we find ourselves in this world, in this physical world, but we actually inhabit another dimension of reality, and it's non-physical, it's non-material, it's a realm of value, meaning, purpose, and all that, which is as far as we understand, other organisms don't seem to reach it in the same sort of way. And one of the interesting things about Scheller, which makes him, somewhat contemporary, maybe not so, but is that he had this whole idea of a kind of ladder of values, which is very much along the same lines of Maslow's notion of the hierarchy of values, in the sense that Maslow, the great American psychologist of the 20th century, died in the early 70s. He believed that humans had what he called a hierarchy of needs. And so we have base level need is, food and drink, food and water. And then next level is shelter, some little, nook somewhere that you call your own in some way. And then after that, some kind of emotional relationship, with another human being, or it could be a pet or something along those lines, something where there's some kind of, bonding. And then self-esteem. You want the good opinion of your fellows. You want the approval of your peers. And those are all what he called deficiency needs. And likewise, Scheller had a notion where, yes, there is this kind of, basically physical values in the sense of, needing to eat and all that. And then a sort of emotional level of values, and then a kind of level of status sort of thing. And so it's not exactly the same language, but they line up fairly nicely. But then they also both said that past this kind of level of self-esteem or kind of status is what Scheller would call these kind of creative values, and Maslow would call the self-actualizing values. And they're no longer values, not values, well, they're no longer needs that are deficient, where it's not, we're lacking something and so we need it. We have a need to express what we have. We have a need to be creative. It's part of the need to know we talked about before, and all that kind of thing. And Maslow was troubled in last years of his life because although he believed that this was part of everyone's kind of psychological trajectory, normal, healthy, natural human beings should lead up to the self-actualizing level. Not everyone does. In fact, it seemed like more don't. Most of us stay at the self-esteem level, but there's still a minority, the creative minority, we can call them, that do. And this was, Scheller believed that as well. And my feeling is that something like social media suggests to me that majority of people in the, well, I'm going to say the West, but it's not only the West, it's pretty much around the world, who have access to online media and all that, is suggests that we've kind of globally reached the kind of self-esteem level, because we all want the approval of everybody else. I mean, we all do. I post stuff, you post stuff. We want people to like it. We want to get out there and all that kind of thing. And it's not that different than before that, when, a variety of different ways, you write a book or make a movie, whatever. But now it's something that's, out there all the time. And we're all competing for that kind of attention. And what strikes me as a positive thought of that, or inference from that, is that if Maslow's trajectory is right, and Scheller's as well, there is a kind of minority out there that are pursuing these other kind of values, but they're not drawing a lot of attention to themselves doing it. They're not going out of the way and say, "Oh, look at me! Here, I'm self-actualizing." Because if you're doing that, you're not. That's the thing. If you go around saying, "I am a higher type," then that's your sign, boy. You're not, mate. So we all know that. So, but they're doing it on their own, doing their own thing. They're not, well, as I say in the cosmos. They're not occupying Wall Street. They're occupying their mind. And, it's something along those lines. We all have that, but it seems, we still tend to favor, or, well, not favor, many people do, some act of, this kind of impatience of, wanting to change things overnight, which in one sense is understandable. Of course, there are many forces out there that are, creating a unjust world, and there always are. And but this kind of revolution of the mind, let's say, is something that's internal. And all the great teachers, Jung, Gurdjieff, Steiner, basically, if everyone did it, or if not everyone, but if enough people did it, it would have an effect. And I like to apply this notion of non-locality that gets talked about in quantum world or quantum entanglement, where the particles, they know what they're doing, they can talk to each other they have telepathy. And likewise in the brain, the neurons, all the neurons, that when whatever neurons are involved in a particular activity of the brain, they don't all live next to each other. They're on different parts of the brain, but they all know when to fire when that stuff happens, whatever it is. So again, it's another non-locality. So I like to think globally. This is my reason for hope, and it's a bet, it's a risk. There's no guarantees. But globally, there's lots of people like that. There's all these neurons out there, all these other particles out there. They're all doing stuff. We're all connected, but I don't know them personally. We don't talk to each other. We don't have meetings and discuss what we're going to do. We're all doing it. And if enough happens, then, maybe it'll shift. Maybe the need, like in the brain, the brain, they talk about the brain's plasticity, and you have to create new neuronal channels. And maybe we need to do that on the planet in some way, but it takes place at home, where people, I don't think it takes place out in the street, wanting immediate change, but I can understand the frustration that leads to that. But personally, I think, people like myself can make more of a impact on things by just carrying on trying to do what we're doing.
And then suddenly you just have an idea that seems to be an idea whose time has come. I guess that just starts to gain a toehold. Gary, this has been great. I know we're coming up to the end of our time. I had so many things in here that we're not going to get to today.
Oh, sorry. I just rambled.
No,
on.
It was good. It was,
you gave me an opportunity just to talk.
I just like giving you prompts, really. And but before we go, why don't you let people know how to keep in touch with you online, and just maybe if you want to talk a bit about your current thread, like Dark Star Rising, Holy Russia, right?
Yeah, I just so happen to have copies of these. Here we go.
All right, yeah.
So this is the current one, Return of Holy Russia, and it's not quite, but sort of a follow-up to this one.
Yeah.
Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. That came out a couple of years ago, and that's about this kind of occult politics that seemed to have gathered.
And we did do the audiobook for the politics of the occult, so yes.
Yeah, exactly, yes, and it ties in with that. It was an earlier book from about 2010. I mean, in that book, I tried to show that although most representation of politics in the occult tend to be about it on the right wing, and that's true, there's a great deal of that, that you can actually find a kind of left-wing or progressive kind of occult politics as well. And people like Victoria Woodhull, who was the first woman to run for president in the United States in 1870s, and she was a free love advocate and a mesmerist and a healer, but she also translated the Communist Manifesto and all this kind of stuff, and people like Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant who were involved with Indian independence and so on and so on. So there's that too. But in Dark Star Rising, I was actually asked to do that by my editor at Penguin, and it was about this apparent kind of occult politics around Trump and his fellow travelers, people in the alt-right, who claimed somehow to have willed him into power just after the election. And this had to do with the strange phenomena of the Pepe the Frog, who is too long of a story to go into, but somehow, if anyone remembers Pepe from back in those days, I don't know if he's still making the rounds online and all that.
Well, he's become a symbol in Hong Kong now.
Oh, really?
As a completely different incarnation, a symbol of Hong Kong independence.
Okay, well, he's morphed. He's morphed into something else,
Yes.
because here he was, well, in the States, up to Trump's election, he was kind of like this. He suddenly became this. How did an amphibian slacker become a kind of, contemporary swastika, more or less?
Yeah.
And because he was this kind of symbol. Apparently, he was a symbol used by the alt-right and fellow travelers on 4chan to will Trump into power by flooding the internet with images of him supporting Trump, being Trump, associated with Trump. And this was supposed to perform an act of synchromysticism, whereby the internet, reality echoed what was happening on the internet. And it was synchromysticism is a techno upgrade of Jung's synchronicity, where something happening in my head and something happening outside world really seemed to align them together with some powerful, meaningful content, enough for me to say, whoa, how did that happen? So they believe that if you flooded the internet with enough, if the internet is a kind of collective imagination, so if you flooded the internet with enough images, it would echo out in the real world. And well, what happened? Trump got elected. So I don't know. Is that the only way he could have? A magical frog? I don't know. Let's think about it. But in that book, I also talk a great deal about things happening in Russia, because some of the people or some of the ideas that are around Trump or were around Trump, when Bannon was part of his posse at that time,
like Alexander Dugin and
exactly, Evelyn and all that. And so at the end of Dark Star, I had a lot of stuff left over from the Russia chapter, and then I thought, originally I was going to write more about Eurasia, but I thought I gave Dugin a lot of press already, so I didn't want to give him any more. And it turned into, well, what happened was that I read an article about how Putin in about 2015 or so, 14, at a meeting of the United Russia, which is the political party in Russia, he gave his regional governors a reading list. And on it were some of these philosophers, Berdyaev, who I mentioned this evening. On it were these philosophers from this period known as the Silver Age, which I knew of and had written about in my book, A Dark Muse, and some other things. And it was this fantastic time in Russian culture, 1890s up into just before the Bolsheviks showed up, when it was this fantastic, efflorescence of music and poetry and art and mystical ideas and literature. I mean, Dostoevsky kind of preceded it, but he led up to it. In any case, so it struck me as interesting that, whatever Putin's idea is for suggesting reading these people, it's interesting that he's doing that. And then I saw the response from David Brooks in the New York Times and other kind of Western critics, and they were basically saying, Putin is, he's referring to these Russian exceptionalists, which is the term now. It's anachronistic. It wasn't used then. But these exceptionalist thinkers who think Russia has this messianic future and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, excuse me, yes, to some extent that's true, but it's actually, there's a lot more than that. And so I thought, they're worth, knowing about and reading. And then I realized that what these guys were talking about in the years just before the Russian Revolution, they were basically trying to compensate for what had happened to Western philosophy, which become completely inundated with materialism and reductionism, positivism at that time. Completely practical and utilitarian. And for sake of a better word, it had lost its soul. And these Russian philosophers who came after the great wave of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, whose writing was just it was volcanic compared to what was happening in the West. I mean, Flaubert is a great artist, but he wasn't dealing with any of the existential issues that people like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, they erupted. And suddenly it was like, and they're completely obsessed, maybe too strong a word, with ideas of the soul and free will and the meaning of life and all that kind of thing, which the West had completely said, this is all illusion, or, whatever, which they're still saying today. And I believe that what people like Berdyaev and Soloviev and others at that time had to offer is still, valuable to us today. And there is still the idea where it's not Russia literally. I mean, I'm not, in any way kind of condoning or supporting whatever Putin's doing. He's a politician and a tactician. He's the occasion for the book. The idea is that like what these people are talking about is still valid for us today. And it does have to do fundamentally, giving it a really thumbnail, account here, is this notion of an integral kind of philosophy. where, yes, all the practical values of the West and the utilitarian logical values of the West, yes, we need them. They're important and all that. But this deeper, intuitive, implicit, soulful, mystical, even awareness and appreciation of things is something that the West lacks. And then the two need to come together in some way and to create, something beyond. And we're still in the same boat now, 100 years later. So I'm not saying these guys have all the answers, but they certainly have things to suggest, that we can learn from today. And so that's where it's at now. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, I have a web page, garylachman.co.uk. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook.
What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, Jesus, I don't know. But you can just find me. It's Gary Lachman.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes page.
Okay. I'll send it to you. I'll give you an email.
No, that's okay. All right. Well, again, thanks, and looking forward to the next one too.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me go on.
All right, no problem. It was great.
All right, cheers. Take care. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to hit the stop here.